Kale Draven reclined on the crimson velvet sofa, while the heart of dusk pulsed on the marble table before him, its ethereal glow casting shadows that danced like dying stars across the obsidian floor. His eyes were barely open, his centuries-old body arranged in perfect mimicry of his death sleep, every inhale calculated, every muscle deliberately still. It was a trap, an ancient and merciless trap he had set for every maid who dared enter the throne room of Dravengard Castle. None had survived it, absolutely none. The crystal always revealed their greed, burning them from the inside out, and with each failure, another fragment of Kale's capacity for trust turned to ash. But on that moonlit evening in late autumn, something different happened. Marina Vale, 26 years old, her dark hair pinned beneath a simple white cap, wearing the palace's standard black dress with its crisp white apron, entered the chamber with steady steps, saw the glowing relic, and stopped. Kale felt something he hadn't experienced in 4 centuries. His undead heart stuttered in his chest as he watched through half-lidded eyes. It was always at this moment, the moment of revelation, the moment when mortals showed who they truly were when they believed death itself was sleeping. Marina approached the table. Her hands, calloused from years of labor, hovered over the pulsing crystal. Kale braced himself for the screaming, the inevitable combustion, but then she did something that he had never, in his 847 years of existence, in all his meticulously crafted tests, witnessed. Something so unexpected, so impossibly gentle and, at the same time, profound, that it made every certainty he held about humanity, about magic, about his own dead heart, shatter like ancient glass. This quiet maid who earned barely enough to feed herself, who walked 3 miles through dangerous woods each day to reach the castle gates, had just done something that froze the vampire king on his sofa, and what began as suspicion would transform into the most improbable tale the immortal realms would whisper about for generations to come. A story about what remains when everything else is taken, and about how sometimes the most powerful creatures must pretend to sleep to finally awaken. Kale Draven hadn't been forged from ice and shadow. There was a time, centuries ago, when he smiled, when he walked among his people without fear, when he believed the ancient alliance between vampires and the Seraphborn would last forever. But that was before the Night of Broken Oaths, before he discovered that his closest council member, Lord Erasmus Thorn, the advisor he had trusted for 300 years, had orchestrated the genocide of the entire Seraphborn bloodline to seize their sacred relics. Erasmus had stolen the memory of Kale's vow directly from his mind using forbidden blood magic, then vanished into the Shadow Realms with 12 of the kingdom's most powerful artifacts. The hunt lasted 70 years without resolution, but the worst part wasn't losing the relics, it was losing the ability to remember why he had once fought to protect mortals at all. Since then, no maid survived service in Dravengard Castle for longer than a fortnight. Kale had created a system. He would place the Heart of Dusk, the most temperamental and dangerous of the remaining relics, in plain sight during his death sleeps. Any servant who touched it with selfish intent would ignite from within, their screams echoing through the marble corridors as a warning to all who followed. He observed everything from the shadows, his 3 elite guards, Ronan Blackthorn, Silas Crow, and Dorian Vex, positioned with crossbows loaded with silverwood bolts. When the relic claimed another victim, he would have their ashes swept away without ceremony, without remorse, without a flicker of the compassion he'd buried alongside the Seraphborn, 17 servants in 4 centuries. His reputation across the vampire territories was absolute, the undead king whom none could serve. The castle itself sprawled across a mountaintop shrouded in perpetual twilight, its 7 towers piercing the crimson clouds. An abandoned observatory where he once studied stars with his Seraphborn allies, gardens overrun with night-blooming flowers that no one tended, chambers filled with covered mirrors because he could no longer bear his own reflection, Gothic architecture soaked in moonlight and regret, and a suffocating silence that emanated from every shadowed corridor. Kale ruled with absolute precision, attended council meetings that lasted until dawn, fed on the blood of willing donors without tasting it, slept his death sleeps alone, lived an existence where every century was counted, every decree calculated, every emotion buried so deep that even he had forgotten where he'd hidden his humanity. When Marina Vale appeared for her interview that previous Monday, he nearly dismissed her before she reached the throne room doors. Her uniform was faded from repeated washing, her boots were worn but polished, and she carried herself with a stillness that reminded him of someone, though he couldn't remember who. But there was something in her gray eyes, a light, a fearlessness he hadn't seen since the Seraph-born walked freely through these halls. "Lord Draven?" she asked, her voice steady as she bowed, not in terror, but in respect. "I'm Marina Vale. Thank you for considering my application." Kale studied her from his throne as if she were a puzzle written in a language he'd forgotten. "Miss Vale, I will be direct. I have exacting standards. I do not tolerate tardiness, I do not tolerate carelessness, and I certainly do not tolerate those who covet what belongs to the crown." "That's good, my lord," Marina replied, her voice calm. "Because I arrive before dawn, I treat ancient things with the reverence they deserve, and my grandmother always said I was cursed with an honest tongue. Once I walked 2 hours back to a merchant's stall to return a coin, I was given an error." He'd already forgotten it existed. Kale's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered behind his amber eyes. Interesting. Very interesting. Either she was the most skilled deceiver he'd encountered in 8 centuries, or mortals like her still existed against all probability. Trial period. 1 week. Duties begin at sunset tomorrow. At sunset. Marina tilted her head slightly. "Then I'll arrive an hour before to prepare your chambers properly. I notice the candles in the entrance hall are from 3 different makers. The wax burns unevenly. That would drive me mad." Kale didn't respond. He simply handed her an iron key that had been forged in dragon fire and a scroll listing 47 specific instructions. Marina accepted both, bowed again, and left humming a melody that made his dead heart ache with phantom memories. That night, Kale prepared the final test with the precision of an executioner. He placed the Heart of Dusk on the marble table in the throne room, positioned exactly where Marina would need to pass with her cleaning supplies. He summoned Ronan, Silas, and Dorian, instructing them to hide in the shadows with weapons ready. He arranged himself on the crimson sofa in perfect stillness, practicing the death-sleep posture he'd perfected over centuries. The next evening, at precisely 1 hour before sunset, the castle bells chimed with Marina's arrival. Kale descended the grand staircase and opened the iron doors himself. Marina stood there with a worn leather satchel over her shoulder. "Good evening, Lord Draven. I brought tea from the village, blackthorn and moonflower. The castle feels like it needs warmth." Before he could refuse, Marina was already moving through the entrance hall, lighting candles with practiced efficiency, adjusting their placement so the light fell in softer patterns. "You arrived earlier than required. I warned you, my lord. I take my promises seriously." Marina glanced back at him with the faintest smile. "Now, shall I start with the upper galleries, or would you prefer I begin in the throne room?" Kale remained frozen in the doorway. No mortal had ever moved through his castle with such ease. No one had brought him tea. No one had suggested his home needed warmth. And certainly no one had smiled at him, genuinely smiled, in longer than he could remember. "Begin with the upper galleries," he said quietly. "The throne room can wait." Marina nodded and disappeared up the staircase, the scent of blackthorn tea lingering in the cold air. Kale waited exactly 1 hour, long enough for her to become absorbed in her work. Then he moved to the throne room, ensured the Heart of Dusk was pulsing with its characteristic instability, and reclined on the velvet sofa. He slowed his breathing to imperceptible levels, closed his eyes until only a sliver of vision remained, and let his body sink into perfect stillness. He heard her footsteps descending the stone stairs, light but purposeful. The soft sound of her cleaning supplies. The whisper of her dress against the floor. The rhythm of her heartbeat, steady, unafraid. The footsteps stopped. Absolute silence. And then Marina did something that would change the fate of the vampire kingdom forever. Marina's fingers touched the heart of dusk with a gentleness that defied every law Cale had witnessed in 8 centuries of existence. The crystal didn't scream. It didn't ignite. It didn't reduce her to ash and echoes. Instead, it sang. A low, resonant hum filled the throne room, ancient, mournful, like an instrument that had forgotten its own melody until this precise moment. The pulsing instability that had flickered through the relic for 400 years suddenly steadied, its glow shifting from erratic crimson to a soft, luminous silver. Marina whispered something Cale couldn't hear, her lips forming syllables in a language that should have been dead, and the crystal responded by blooming brighter in her palm. Cale's eyes snapped fully open. He rose from the sofa with the fluid grace of a predator, his amber gaze locked on Marina with an intensity that had made warlords kneel and kingdoms surrender. She wasn't burning. She wasn't screaming. She was healing the relic, her touch drawing out the corruption that had festered inside it since Erasmus Thorne's betrayal. Impossible, he breathed, the word falling from his lips like a prayer to gods he'd stopped believing in. Before Marina could turn, 3 shadows erupted from the corners of the throne room. Ronan Blackthorn materialized to her left, his crossbow aimed at her heart. Silas Crow appeared behind her, twin daggers of dusk steel gleaming in the candlelight. Dorian Vex stepped from the darkness near the throne, his longbow drawn, the silverwood bolt glowing with lethal magic. Step away from the relic, Ronan commanded, his voice like gravel and winter frost. Slowly. Marina startled, her hand jerking back from the crystal. The moment her skin lost contact, the heart of dusk flickered, its glow dimming as if mourning the loss. She raised both hands, palms open, her gray eyes wide but remarkably calm for someone surrounded by immortal killers. I'm sorry, she said, her voice steady despite the weapons trained on her. I didn't mean to overstep. She glanced at the crystal, genuine distress crossing her features. It was hurting. I could feel it hurting. Cale moved closer, circling her like he was deciphering a text written in shifting ink. Relics don't hurt, Miss Vale. They're objects of power, not living things. This one does. Marina's gaze flickered to the heart of dusk, then back to Cale. It's been in pain for so long. The magic inside is fractured, like someone tore pieces away and left it bleeding. Silas and Dorian exchanged glances. Ronan's jaw tightened, but his crossbow didn't waver. Cale stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. How do you know what the relic feels? I don't know, Marina admitted, confusion flickering across her face. It called to me. When I walked past it, I heard. She hesitated, searching for words. Not a voice, exactly. More like a pull. Like it recognized something in me. Relics don't call to humans, Cale said softly, dangerously. They certainly don't recognize them. I know it sounds impossible, my lord. Marina's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't lower them. But I'm telling you the truth. Then explain the incantation. Cale's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Where did you learn words spoken only by the Seraphborn? Words that haven't been uttered in this castle since the night of broken oaths. Marina blinked, genuine bewilderment replacing her earlier calm. I don't know what I said. The words just came, like a memory that wasn't mine, but somehow was. She pressed her fingers to her temple, wincing. When I touched the crystal, I saw fragments. Fire. A woman with eyes like mine. A promise someone made and forgot. The throne room fell into suffocating silence. Kale stared at her, his centuries of control fracturing around the edges. The Seraph-born were extinct. He'd searched for survivors for 70 years and found only graves and ashes. Yet this maid, this impossible woman, spoke their language, heard their relics, and somehow channeled their magic without any training. "Lower your weapons," Kale commanded. "My lord," Ronan began. "Lower them." Kale's tone left no room for argument. The 3 guards obeyed, though their postures remained coiled and ready. Kale gestured toward the heart of dusk. "Touch it again." Marina hesitated, glancing at the guards. "Are you certain? If I wanted you dead, Miss Vale, you would already be ash." Kale's expression was unreadable. "Touch the crystal. Show me I'm not imagining what I saw." Marina approached the marble table slowly. The moment her fingers neared the relic, it blazed to life, its silver glow intensifying until it cast her shadow across the entire throne room. She placed her palm fully on its surface, and the heart of dusk pulsed in perfect rhythm with her heartbeat, steady, warm, alive in a way it hadn't been since the Seraph-born walked these halls. Ronan cursed under his breath in old vampiric. Silas leaned against the nearest column, eyes wide. Dorian simply stared, his usually stoic expression cracking into something resembling awe. "Well," Kale murmured, his mind racing through centuries of knowledge, searching for any explanation that didn't defy everything he understood about magic and bloodlines. "It appears we need to conduct a formal relic test." He spent the next hour subjecting Marina to every verification ritual he could remember. She held ancient artifacts that should have rejected mortal touch. She stood in a circle of protective wards designed to repel anyone without Seraph-born blood. She spoke activation phrases for relics that hadn't responded in 4 centuries, and every single one answered her call. By the time the moon reached its zenith, Kale stood before an irrefutable truth. Marina Vale carried the blood of a lineage that should no longer exist. And somehow, impossibly, she had no idea. "You will remain in the castle," Kale announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Not in the servants' quarters. I'm assigning you chambers in the East Tower. You don't leave Dravengard's walls without my permission, and you certainly don't touch any more relics without my supervision." Marina's exhaustion was evident, but she nodded. "As you command, my lord." "This isn't a command, Miss Vale. This is a precaution." Kale's amber eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What you are should be impossible. Until I understand how you're possible, you stay where I can see you." By dawn, whispers had already begun spreading through the castle like wildfire through dead leaves. The new maid touched the heart of dusk and lived. The king's test failed for the first time in centuries. The girl must be blessed, or cursed. Perhaps she's a spy, a weapon, a miracle. Kale heard every rumor, dismissed none of them, and trusted nothing except the evidence of his own eyes. Marina Vale was dangerous in ways she didn't comprehend. And he, who had sworn never to let another soul close enough to wound him, now found himself binding her to his side. In the small but surprisingly comfortable chambers of the East Tower, Marina sat on the edge of an actual bed, not a servant's cot, but a real bed with velvet curtains and silk sheets. Her hands still tingled from touching so many ancient objects, her mind spinning with fragments of memories that couldn't possibly be hers. She stared at her reflection in the darkened window, seeing her grandmother's face superimposed over her own. The old woman had died whispering about castles and promises, about a king who forgot, and a bloodline that remembered. Marina had thought they were fevered dreams. Now she wasn't certain. "I didn't think it would awaken him," she whispered to the darkness, her voice barely audible even to herself. But in the throne room 3 floors below, Kale heard those words as clearly as if she'd spoken them directly into his ear, because for the first time in 4 centuries, his undead heart had begun to listen. Kale didn't sleep that day. While the sun burned beyond the castle's enchanted walls, He stood in the archives of eternal night, a chamber carved into the mountain itself, its walls lined with texts bound in leather, dragon scale, and things that had once been alive. Dust motes drifted through the air like captured stars as he pulled volume after volume from shelves that hadn't been touched in centuries. The Compendium of Lost Bloodlines, Chronicles of the Seraph-born Alliance, treaties written in blood and starlight. He laid them across the obsidian table, his fingers tracing illustrations of people who looked disturbingly like Marina. The gray eyes, the particular angle of the cheekbones, the way they held their hands when touching sacred objects, reverently, as if the relics were living things that deserved gentleness. The Seraph-born had been humanity's bridge to the divine, mortals born with the ability to commune with magical artifacts, to heal corrupted enchantments, to serve as keepers of the boundary between the mortal and immortal realms. They'd been the vampire kingdom's most trusted allies for 3,000 years, until Lord Erasmus decided their power was too valuable to share. Cale's jaw tightened as he read the execution records. Every Seraph-born settlement burned, every temple razed, every child, every elder, every keeper of the ancient ways gone. He'd searched for survivors until the search itself became a kind of madness, but there had been nothing. Only graves and the lingering scent of betrayal. Yet Marina existed. A sharp pain lanced through Cale's temple, not physical, but the phantom ache of a memory trying to surface through magical barriers. He gripped the table's edge, his vision fracturing. Fire. So much fire. A woman kneeling in ash, her gray eyes meeting his as blood soaked through her robes. "Promise me," she whispered, her hand reaching for his. "Swear you'll protect them. Swear on your eternal soul." "I swear," Cale heard himself say, his voice younger, less hollow. "I swear by blood and shadow, I will guard your descendants until the stars fall." Her smile, sad and knowing. "Then remember, Cale Draven. When the memory tries to hide, remember." The vision shattered like glass. Cale stumbled backward, breathing hard, an unnecessary habit from a mortal life he barely recalled. His hands were shaking. He stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. "My lord," Ronan's voice cut through the silence. The guard stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "The maid is awake. You ordered her brought to the relic chamber at moonrise." Cale composed himself with centuries of practice, but something in Ronan's gaze suggested the guard had seen more than Cale wanted him to. "Gather Silas and Dorian. This test requires witnesses." The relic chamber existed in the castle's deepest level, accessible only by a staircase that spiraled down into living stone. Marina descended carefully, her simple gray dress replaced with something more practical, dark trousers and a white blouse the castle steward had provided. She looked less like a maid and more like what she was becoming, a mystery Cale couldn't afford to ignore. The chamber itself was circular, its walls honeycombed with alcoves containing artifacts from every era of vampire history. Swords that had slain dragons, crowns worn by forgotten kings, crystals that pulsed with imprisoned starlight, and in the center, on a pedestal of black marble, sat a collection of items Cale had arranged specifically for this test. Marina paused at the threshold, her breath catching. "I can feel them," she whispered. "They're all singing. Different notes, but the same song." Silas, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, raised an eyebrow. "She hears them like we hear heartbeats." "Or she's a very talented liar," Ronan muttered, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "My lord, with respect, this could be an elaborate deception. A spy trained to mimic Seraph-born abilities." "By whom?" Dorian asked, his tone genuinely curious rather than confrontational. "The Seraph-born have been extinct for 4 centuries. Who would have the knowledge to train such a spy?" "Someone who wants the king distracted," Ronan replied. "Someone who knows our history well enough to exploit it." Cale raised a hand. silencing them both. Miss Vale, approach the pedestal. Marina moved forward, her steps slow but steady. The moment she came within 3 feet of the artifacts, every single relic began to glow. A dagger hummed in its sheath. An amulet lifted slightly, as if drawn to her. A mirror surface rippled like disturbed water. Touch the chalice of dawn, Kale instructed, pointing to a silver cup engraved with symbols that predated written language. It was forged by the first Seraph-born and given to my predecessor as a sign of alliance. It hasn't responded to any touch, vampire or mortal, in 300 years. Marina reached for the chalice hesitantly. The instant her fingers brushed the silver, it blazed with light so pure and bright that Silas shielded his eyes. The engravings came alive, flowing across the surface like liquid gold, forming patterns that spelled out words in the old tongue. "What does it say?" Marina asked, staring at the shifting symbols. Kale's voice was barely audible. "Guardian returns. Memory wakes. The oath remembers what the king forgot." The chalice's light faded, but it continued to emit a soft warmth in Marina's hands. "She's Seraph-born," Silas said quietly, something like wonder in his usually cynical tone. "She has to be. Nothing else explains this." "Seraph-born are extinct," Ronan insisted, though his conviction sounded less certain now. "Clearly they're not," Dorian observed. "The question is, how did one survive, and why does she have no knowledge of what she is?" Marina set the chalice down carefully, turning to face Kale. "My lord, I need to tell you something." Her voice wavered slightly. "Something I should have mentioned when I first arrived." Kale's amber eyes locked onto hers. "Speak." "My village, Thornwick, in the Eastern Valleys, was destroyed 3 years ago." Marina's hands clenched at her sides. "Night creatures came. They killed everyone. My parents, my neighbors, children I'd watched grow up." Her voice broke, then steadied. "They wore your crest, Lord Draven. The crimson dragon on black. I saw it on their armor before I ran." The chamber went deathly silent. "I had nothing to do with Thornwick's destruction," Kale said, his tone dangerously quiet. "I give you my word." "Then who did?" Marina's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "Who used your symbol to murder innocent people?" Kale wanted to answer. The words were there, explanations about rogue vampires, about enemies who would use his crest to sow discord, about investigations that had yielded nothing. But something stopped him, the same instinct that had kept him alive for 8 centuries. Saying too much would reveal how deeply Thornwick's destruction had troubled him, how he'd sent his best trackers to find the perpetrators and found only cold trails and dead ends. "That is what I intend to discover," he said instead. Marina studied his face, searching for deception, and apparently finding none. "I came here because I needed to know if you ordered it. If the Vampire King was truly the monster the survivors claimed. And now that you've touched my relics, heard them sing, stood in my castle without burning?" Kale moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. "What do you believe?" "I believe," Marina said carefully, "that I don't understand anything anymore. Not about you, not about these relics, not about why my grandmother spent her last breath telling me to find Dravengard Castle and remind the king of his promise." Kale felt the world tilt. Another flash of memory. The dying woman, her gray eyes, her whispered words. He turned away before Marina could see his expression fracture. "You'll continue your work in the castle, but you'll also begin training with the relics. If you carry Seraph-born blood, you need to understand what that means." "And if I refuse?" Kale glanced back, his face an unreadable mask once more. "Then you'll spend the rest of your mortal life wondering why every magical artifact in the kingdom responds to your touch like you're the answer to a question they've been asking for 400 years. Marina held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll train." That night, Kale returned to his private chambers and did something he hadn't done in decades. He stood before the mirror and truly looked at himself, at the creature he'd become. All sharp edges and cold calculations. A king who trusted no one because trust had been burned out of him along with his capacity for warmth. Yet when Marina looked at him, he felt something stirring beneath the ice. Something dangerous and terrifying and achingly human. His gaze drifted to the heart of dusk, which he'd brought to his chambers for observation. The crystal pulsed on his dusk, its rhythm different than before, steadier, stronger, as if Marina's touch had awakened something dormant inside it. As Kale watched, the crystal's glow intensified. Patterns began forming in its depths, shadows and light arranging themselves into shapes that looked disturbingly like memories trying to surface. The relic was changing, and Kale realized with a cold certainty that whatever memory was locked inside the heart of dusk, whatever truth Erasmus Thorn had stolen from his mind 4 centuries ago, it was finally preparing to reveal itself. Because Marina Vale, impossible and dangerous and achingly alive, had done what no one else could, she'd awakened what was meant to stay sleeping forever. 3 nights later, Kale summoned Marina to his private study, a sanctuary he'd permitted no living soul to enter in over 2 centuries. She arrived at midnight, still wearing the training clothes she'd been given for her work with the relics, dark leather pants, and a fitted jacket that allowed free movement. Her hair was pulled back, revealing the graceful line of her neck, and there was a new confidence in the way she carried herself. 3 days of controlled practice with the artifacts had awakened something in her, a recognition of power she was only beginning to understand. "You asked to see me, my lord?" Marina's voice remained respectful, but the trembling uncertainty of their first encounters had been replaced by something steadier. Kale stood by the window, the heart of dusk cradled in his hands. Its pulsing had grown more insistent over the past 72 hours, its light forming patterns that looked increasingly like written language, a language even he couldn't fully decipher. "The crystal has been restless," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Since you stabilized it, something inside has been trying to emerge. A memory, I believe. One that was deliberately sealed." Marina approached slowly, her gray eyes fixed on the relic. "I can feel it too, like someone locked behind a door, knocking to get out. I need you to help me open that door." Kale turned to face her fully, and she saw something in his expression she'd never witnessed before. Vulnerability. "But I warn you, I don't know what we'll find. Memory magic, especially the kind used to seal and steal recollections, can be volatile." "Will it hurt?" "Possibly." Kale's honesty was stark. Memory extractions are painful. Witnessing them can be equally devastating. Marina studied the crystal, then Kale, then made her decision with the same quiet bravery she'd shown every moment since entering Dravengard. "Show me." Kale moved to the center of the study, where a circle had been inscribed into the floor in silver that never tarnished, protective wards older than most kingdoms. He placed the heart of dusk on a pedestal within the circle and gestured for Marina to stand beside him. "Place your hand on the crystal," he instructed. "I'll place mine over yours. Together, we may be strong enough to unlock what's hidden." Marina stepped into the circle, the wards humming to life around them with a sound like distant bells. She reached for the heart of dusk, her fingers settling on its surface. The moment she touched it, the crystal blazed with recognition. Kale moved behind her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from his body, a reminder of what he was, what he would always be. His hand, larger and marked with scars from centuries of warfare, covered hers completely. "Don't let go," he whispered against her ear. "No matter what you see." "I won't," she promised. Kale began speaking in Old Vampiric, words that predated human civilization, his voice resonating with power accumulated over 8 centuries of existence. The crystal responded, its light intensifying until the entire study dissolved into white brilliance. Then the memory began. The world reformed around them. Not the study, but a battlefield at twilight. Bodies lay scattered across scorched earth. The acrid smell of burning filled the air. And there, kneeling in the ash, was Kale. But not the Kale Marina knew. This version was younger somehow, though his face was the same. His eyes held something the current Kale had lost. Hope. He cradled a dying woman in his arms. Marina gasped. The woman's face was her own, or so similar it might as well have been. The same gray eyes, now clouded with approaching death. The same delicate bone structure. The same expression of fierce determination even as life drained away. Kale, the woman whispered, blood staining her lips. You have to listen. My bloodline, they'll come for us. For all of us. Lyanna, don't speak. I'll find a healer. There's no time. Her hand gripped his, with surprising strength. Promise me. Swear you'll protect my descendants. The Seraph-born can't die out completely. We're the balance. Without us, the relics will corrupt. The magic will turn poisonous. Kale's jaw clenched. I swear it. By blood and shadow, by the eternal night that courses through my veins, I will guard your bloodline until the stars themselves go dark. As he spoke, magic flared between them, ancient binding magic that wrapped around his words like chains of silver fire. A vow that couldn't be broken without destroying the one who made it. Lyanna smiled, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, old friend. Tell them I loved them. Every generation that comes after. Tell them. She died in his arms, the light fading from her eyes. The memory should have ended there. Marina felt Kale's hand tighten over hers, felt his entire body go rigid with grief he'd forgotten he could feel. But the vision continued. The scene shifted. Weeks later, perhaps months. Kale stood in a council chamber Marina recognized. It was directly below the current throne room, though the furnishings were different, older. You're too attached to the mortals, a voice said. Marina and Kale both turned to see a vampire she didn't recognize, elegant, silver-haired, with eyes like chips of ice. The Seraph-born are extinct. Let them stay that way. I made a vow, Erasmus. Then I'll help you unmake it. Asterisk before Kale could react, Erasmus raised his hand. Black tendrils of magic, forbidden blood magic, the kind that required sacrifice, shot forward and wrapped around Kale's skull. Asterisk. Kale screamed. The sound was inhuman, agonized, as Erasmus reached into his mind and began tearing out pieces. Memory fragments scattered like ash. The vow, Lyanna's face, the promise, the love he'd held for the Seraph-born alliance, all of it ripped away with surgical precision. You'll thank me later, Erasmus said as Kale collapsed. Sometimes mercy requires cruelty. The memory released them violently. Marina and Kale stumbled backwards simultaneously, gasping as if they'd been drowning. The heart of dusk's light dimmed to its normal faint glow, the projection complete. Marina's legs gave out. She sank to her knees, trembling with the weight of what she'd witnessed. Centuries of grief, betrayal, and stolen memories crashed over her like a wave. But Kale stood frozen, his face a mask of devastation. His hands shook. His amber eyes glistened with something that might have been tears if vampires could still produce them. Lyanna, he whispered, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. Her name was Lyanna Seraph-born. She was my ancestor, Marina breathed. My grandmother's grandmother, maybe further back. She looked exactly like you. Kale's voice cracked. She looked exactly like you. The silence that followed was suffocating. Marina watched as 8 centuries of control crumbled before her eyes. The vampire king who trusted no one, who had built walls around his heart so high that nothing could scale them, was breaking. I forgot her. Kale's words were barely audible. I forgot my vow. I forgot why I was supposed to protect the Seraph-born descendants. When Thornwick burned, when your village was destroyed, I investigated, but I didn't. He pressed his palms against his eyes. I didn't feel the urgency I should have felt because Erasmus stole that from me. Marina rose on unsteady legs and moved toward him. Every instinct told her to keep her distance, that approaching a vampire in emotional distress was dangerous. But something stronger than instinct guided her. It wasn't your fault, she said quietly. You couldn't protect what you didn't remember. That's not how vows work. Kale lowered his hands, and Marina saw raw anguish in his eyes. When you bind yourself with magic, the universe doesn't care about your excuses. I swore to guard your bloodline. I failed. Erasmus failed you. I should have been stronger. The words erupted from him with volcanic force. I should have felt the vow even without the memory. Something should have pulled me toward your people, toward you, but I felt nothing. Just emptiness where the oath should have been burning. Marina did something then that surprised them both. She reached for his hand, the hand that had held her ancestor as she died, the hand that had made promises he couldn't keep because they'd been stolen from his mind. You're feeling it now, she said softly. The pull.
The vow.
It's why you can't let me out of your sight. Why every time I touch a relic, you look like you're witnessing a miracle. The magic is still there, Kale. It was just buried. Kale stared at their joined hands, at the way her warmth contrasted with his cold. How many of your people died? Because I forgot. How many villages burned while I investigated half-heartedly, without the urgency the vow should have created? I don't know, Marina admitted. But I know this. You remember now. And you can't change the past, but you can change what happens next. Kale looked at her then, truly looked at her, and saw Liona's eyes staring back at him across 4 centuries. Saw the bloodline he'd sworn to protect, standing before him alive and impossible and brave beyond measure. I failed them, he whispered, his voice devastated, broken in a way Marina suspected it hadn't been since the night Erasmus ripped his memories away. I failed you. Marina squeezed his hand tighter. Then don't fail me again. The heart of dusk pulsed softly between them, its light warm and steady, no longer a relic in pain, but a witness to a vow being remembered, a promise being reforged, and 2 souls beginning to heal wounds they'd carried across the years without even knowing they'd been bleeding. In the days following the memory revelation, something fundamental shifted in Dravengard Castle. Kale Draven, who had spent 4 centuries maintaining perfect isolation, found himself seeking Marina's presence with increasing frequency. Not overtly. He was still the vampire king, still bound by propriety and centuries of carefully constructed walls. But staff began noticing how their lord would appear in whatever chamber Marina happened to be working in, offering observations about the relics she restored, asking questions about her progress with a gentleness that seemed foreign on his usually severe features. The moonstone circlet hasn't glowed like that in 200 years, he remarked one evening, watching as Marina carefully polished the ancient crown. Her touch brought warmth back to gems that had gone cold and lifeless. It wants to be useful again, Marina replied, not looking up from her work. All these relics, they were created with purpose. Being locked away and forgotten hurts them. Kale studied her profile in the candlelight. You speak of them as if they have feelings, don't they? Marina finally met his gaze. You felt what the heart of dusk was experiencing.
Pain.
Loneliness. They need to be understood. She paused, then added quietly, not so different from people, really. Something flickered across Kale's face. Recognition, perhaps, or discomfort at being seen so clearly. The servants noticed. Whispers spread through the castle like smoke. The king visits her chambers. Not her chambers, wherever she works. He watches her restore the relics.
He smiles sometimes.
Have you seen? Actually smiles. It's unnatural. She's bewitched him. Or maybe he's finally remembered how to be something other than ice. The guards' reactions were predictably divided. Ronan Blackthorn grew more suspicious with each passing day. "My lord, with respect, you're spending an unusual amount of time with a seraph-born woman." "Her name is Marina," Kale corrected, not looking up from the military reports on his desk. "And she's restoring artifacts that have been dormant for centuries." "My attention is appropriate. Your attention is obsessive." Ronan's bluntness was one of the reasons Kale had kept him close for 3 centuries. "You've changed your routines. You take meals in the relic chambers now instead of alone. You've canceled council meetings to observe her work." "Are you questioning my judgment?" "I'm questioning whether she's influencing it." Ronan's hand rested on his sword hilt, not a threat, but a reminder of his oath to protect the king, even from himself. 400 years you've trusted no one. Now suddenly I remember why I should have been protecting her bloodline all along. Kale's voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. "My judgment is sound, Ronan. Your concern is noted and dismissed." Silas Crow had a different perspective entirely. "She's good for him," he told Dorian one night while they stood watch. "I haven't seen the king this present in decades. He's always been here physically, but his mind was somewhere else. Somewhere cold." Dorian Vex, ever the observer, simply nodded. "She reminds him of what he lost. Whether that's healing or torture remains to be seen." He paused, his sharp eyes tracking Marina as she crossed the courtyard below. "But I'll admit, there's something compelling about watching ice begin to thaw." "Poetic," Silas said dryly. "I contain multitudes." Marina's presence did more than affect Kale. It was transforming the castle itself. Every relic she touched seemed to awaken. Tapestries that had hung colorless for centuries began showing their original vibrant hues. Enchanted fountains in the gardens started flowing again, their waters singing with magic that had gone silent. Even the protective wards hummed with renewed strength, as if her seraph-born blood reminded them of their original purpose. "You're rebuilding what Erasmus broke," Kale observed one twilight evening. He'd brought Marina to the highest tower, a place he'd shown no one, where he went when the weight of immortality became too heavy. The view stretched for miles, mountains shrouded in mist, forests dark with ancient trees, and far below, the glittering lights of villages under his protection. Marina stood at the parapet, the wind catching her hair. "I'm just touching things. They're healing themselves." "No." Kale moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance even as every instinct urged him closer. "You're giving them permission to heal. There's a difference." They stood in silence, watching the moon rise. "Can I ask you something?" Marina's voice was soft. "What was it like before Erasmus betrayed you? Before you forgot?" Kale's jaw tightened, but he didn't deflect. The old him would have changed the subject, retreated behind icy courtesy. But something about Marina made him want to answer honestly. "Different," he finally said. "I was different. I believed in alliances, in the possibility that vampires and mortals could coexist peacefully. The Seraphborn were proof of that, humans who could touch our magic without being corrupted by it. Lyanna and I spent decades building that bridge." His voice roughened. "When she died, when I made that vow, I thought I was honoring her vision. I didn't know I'd forget it entirely." "It must be exhausting," Marina said quietly, "carrying 4 centuries of that kind of isolation." Kale looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "Trusting no one. Testing everyone. Building walls so high you can't see over them anymore." Marina turned to face him fully. "I understand it. After what was done to you. How could you not? But it must be so lonely." The word hung between them like a confession. "Yes," Kale admitted, the word barely audible. "It is." Marina's expression softened with something that looked dangerously like compassion. "I was lonely too. After Thornwick. I survived when I shouldn't have. I was in the woods gathering herbs when the attack came. By the time I returned, everyone was—" She swallowed hard. "I spent 3 years blaming you, hating you, planning how I'd confront the monster who destroyed my world." Kale's chest constricted painfully. "And now I know you didn't order it. Now I know you forgot you were supposed to protect us." Marina's voice trembled slightly. "Now I don't know what to feel. You should still hate me," Kale said, his voice raw. "I failed your people. Failed you. The reasons don't change the result." "Maybe." Marina stepped closer, close enough that Kale could hear her heartbeat, smell the lavender soap she used, feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "But hatred is exhausting too. And I'm tired of carrying it." They stood facing each other on the highest tower of Dravengard Castle, the wind swirling around them, the moon casting silver light across their features. Kale's amber eyes locked with Marina's gray ones, and something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, the beginning of something neither could name, but both felt with devastating clarity. Kale raised his hand slowly, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, he brushed his fingers against her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted everything people believed about vampire kings. "You terrify me," he whispered, "more than any army, any betrayal, any threat I've faced in 8 centuries. Because you make me want things I'd buried so deep I thought they were dead." Marina leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "What things?" "Hope," Kale breathed. "Connection. The possibility that I could be something other than the cold creature I've become." "You already are," Marina said softly. "You just needed someone to remind you." Kale's thumb traced the line of her jaw, his expression a mixture of longing and restraint. The space between them felt charged with electricity, with possibility, with 4 centuries of grief meeting 3 years of loss and finding unexpected solace. Neither moved closer. Neither pulled away. They simply existed in that moment. The vampire king and the seraph-born descendant, bound by ancient vows and new understanding, balanced on the edge of something that could save them both or destroy everything. Then, cutting through the night like a blade, a horn blast echoed across the mountains. 1 long note, then 2 short notes. The alarm signal. Kale's expression transformed instantly from vulnerable to lethal. His hand dropped from Marina's face as he turned toward the sound, every muscle coiling with predatory readiness. "What is it?" Marina asked, already knowing from his reaction that something was terribly wrong. Ronan burst through the tower door, breathing hard. "My lord." Rogue vampires spotted at the eastern border. Same corrupted crests as before. His eyes flicked to Marina, then back to Kale. "They're heading toward the villages under our protection." Kale's face became a mask of cold fury. "How many?" "At least 20. Maybe more. Mobilize every guard. We ride within the hour." Kale moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at Marina with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Stay in the castle. Lock yourself in the relic chamber. Don't open the door for anyone except me." "Kale, promise me." His voice carried the weight of his ancient vow, the memory of failure, the terror of losing someone else he was bound to protect. "Please." Marina saw the fear in his eyes, real, raw, unhidden fear, and nodded. "I promise." He held her gaze for one more heartbeat, then disappeared down the stairs with Ronan, leaving Marina alone on the tower with the wind and the distant sound of horns calling warriors to battle. And the terrible certainty that whatever was coming was connected to her, to the relics, to the vow that had just been remembered after 4 centuries of silence. Marina lasted exactly 20 minutes in the relic chamber before the Heart of Dusk began screaming. Not audibly. The sound existed only in her mind, a high-pitched wail of warning that drove spikes of pain through her skull. She pressed her hands against her temples, trying to block it out, but the crystal's voice only grew more insistent. "Danger.
Blood. Death."
The Vowkeeper needs you. I promise to stay, Marina whispered to the empty chamber, but her hands were already reaching for the heart of dusk, already wrapping it in cloth and tucking it into the leather satchel she'd been given for transporting relics. He will die if you stay. The oath demands action. Marina had spent 3 years surviving alone after Thornwick burned. She'd learned to trust her instincts, learned that sometimes the safe choice was the wrong one. And every instinct she possessed was screaming that Kale needed her. She grabbed a cloak and ran. The eastern border was 3 miles from Dravengard Castle, through forest so thick that moonlight barely penetrated the canopy. Marina ran faster than she'd ever run, guided by something beyond logic, the pull of the vow Kale had made to her ancestor, now drawing her toward him like a compass pointing to true north. She burst through the tree line and froze. The outpost was burning, not with normal fire, but with black flames that consumed stone as easily as wood. Rogue vampires, she counted at least 15, swarmed through the ruins, their movements jerky and wrong, as if they were puppets operated by unskilled hands. They wore armor emblazoned with Kale's crimson dragon, but the crest was corrupted, twisted, the dragon's eyes replaced with empty voids. And there, in the center of the chaos, Kale fought like a force of nature. His movements were too fast for Marina's eyes to fully track. One moment, he was disarming a rogue with his bare hands. The next, he was across the courtyard, his sword, forged from dusk steel and vampire bone, cutting through corrupted flesh. Ronan, Silas, and Dorian fought in perfect synchronization around him, a unit honed by centuries of battle. But there were too many. Even as Marina watched, 3 rogues broke through the guard's defense. One lunged at Kale from behind, its claws extended, moving with supernatural speed that even the Vampire King couldn't fully anticipate. The heart of dusk burned in Marina's hands. She didn't think so, didn't plan, didn't consider whether she knew how to do what the relic was demanding. She simply ran forward, drawing the crystal from her satchel, and commanded it to protect. Light exploded from the heart of dusk. A barrier of pure silver energy erupted outward, expanding in a dome that encompassed Kale, the 3 guards, and Marina herself. The rogue vampire that had been lunging for Kale's back struck the barrier and disintegrated on contact, reduced to ash that scattered in the wind. Every fighter, ally and enemy alike, froze. Marina stood at the barrier's center, the heart of dusk blazing in her raised hands, her gray eyes glowing with reflected light. Power coursed through her veins like molten silver, ancient and overwhelming and completely beyond her understanding. The barrier pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, alive and responsive to her will. Marina, Kale's voice cut through the shocked silence. What are you? Stay behind the barrier, she shouted, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even herself. I can hold it, but you need to finish this. The remaining rogues attacked the barrier from all sides, but each one that touched it met the same fate, instant obliteration. Marina gritted her teeth as the strain began to build. Maintaining the barrier felt like holding back an avalanche with her bare hands, but she refused to let go. Kale's expression transformed from shock to lethal focus. He nodded once to his guards, then moved. With the barrier protecting them from ambush, the 4 vampires became devastating. They fought with precision and centuries of experience, cutting down the rogues with brutal efficiency. Within minutes, the last corrupted vampire fell, and the courtyard went silent except for the crackling of black flames. Marina felt the barrier begin to collapse. Her legs gave out, the heart of dusk slipping from her fingers as darkness crept into the edges of her vision. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. I have you, Kale whispered against her hair, his voice rough with emotions he couldn't name. I have you. When Marina's vision cleared, she was cradled against Kale's chest as he carried her toward the horses. Ronan, Silas, and Dorian stood nearby, their expressions a mixture of awe and unease. She manifested a seraph-born barrier, Silas breathed. A full barrier. That's master-level magic. How does she not know what she's doing? Because the bloodline remembers even when the individual doesn't, Dorian observed, cleaning his blade with methodical precision. The magic is inherited, instinctual. She doesn't need training. She needs awakening. She needs to be locked away before she attracts more attention, Ronan countered harshly. Every rogue vampire in the territory will be hunting her now. They felt that power. Everyone felt it. Then I'll kill every single one that comes near her. Cale's voice was arctic, absolute. He set Marina down gently against a tree, kneeling before her to check for injuries. Are you hurt? Just exhausted. Marina managed, though her hands still trembled. The crystal told me you needed help. I couldn't. I had to. You promised to stay in the castle. Cale's tone was caught between fury and relief. You gave me your word. And you would have died if I'd kept it. Marina met his gaze defiantly despite her exhaustion. The vow pulled me here.
Your vow.
The one you made to Lyanna. It wouldn't let me stay away while you were in danger. Cale's expression cracked. You could have been killed. So could you. I'm immortal. You're not helpless, Marina finished firmly. Stop treating me like something fragile that needs to be locked in a tower. I just saved your life, Cale. All of your lives. Which is precisely why you're never leaving my sight again. Cale's hands gripped her shoulders, his amber eyes blazing with intensity that was part protectiveness, part something more dangerous. Do you understand what you've revealed tonight? Every vampire, every creature, every power-hungry monster in the realm will now know that a Seraphborn walks among us. You've painted a target on yourself. Then teach me how to fight back instead of ordering me to hide. I'm trying to protect you. I'm not your possession. Marina pushed against his chest, forcing him to release her. I'm not some relic you can lock in a vault. I'm a person, Cale. And I get to decide what risks I take. Cale stood abruptly, raking his hands through his silver hair in frustration. For 8 centuries, he'd maintained perfect control. For 8 centuries, he'd existed in emotional stasis. Now this impossible woman was unraveling him with every defiant word, every brave action, every moment she forced him to feel. You don't understand, he said, his voice raw. I can't, he stopped, the words catching in his throat. Words like I can't lose you, and you terrify me, and something is happening to me that I don't know how to stop. Marina pushed herself to standing, swaying slightly but determined. She moved close enough that Cale had to look down to meet her eyes. Then make me understand. The air between them crackled with tension, anger, fear, and something neither was ready to name. Cale's hands clenched at his sides, every muscle rigid with the effort of maintaining control when all he wanted was to pull her close and never let go. My lord. Ronan's voice cut through the moment like a blade. You need to see this. Grateful for the interruption and hating himself for that gratitude, Cale turned. What is it? Ronan held up a piece of armor torn from one of the rogues. Look at the crest. Look closely. Cale took the metal, examining it in the moonlight. His expression went from frustrated to deadly in an instant. This isn't just a corruption of my symbol, he said quietly. This is a specific variation, one only used within the castle. Within my own court. Silas moved closer. What are you saying? Cale's voice was cold with certainty. These rogues weren't created by an outside enemy. Someone in Dravengard is manufacturing them. Someone with access to restricted heraldry and knowledge of our defenses. A traitor, Dorian concluded. In the castle itself. Cale's gaze found Marina's across the ruined courtyard. She stood there, exhausted and defiant and impossibly brave, the heart of dusk glowing softly at her feet, and he realized with sickening clarity that whoever was creating these monsters had revealed themselves tonight for one reason. They wanted Marina. and they were willing to burn his kingdom to get her. The council chamber had not been used for a formal inquisition in 3 centuries. Now it felt like a tomb. Kale sat at the head of the obsidian table, Marina positioned directly to his right, a placement that had already caused murmurs among the assembled council members. Ronan, Silas, and Dorian stood behind the king's chair, a silent wall of lethal intent. The armor fragment, Kale began, his voice devoid of inflection, was forged in our own smithies. The corrupted crest uses a seal that only 7 vampires in this castle have access to. His amber eyes swept the room. One of you has been creating rogues and sending them to kill innocents under my banner. Silence, thick and suffocating. Then Lord Matthias, ancient even by vampire standards, leaned forward. Perhaps we should discuss why the king has elevated a mortal servant to such a position of trust. This irregularity suggests compromised judgment. Careful, Matthias. Kale's tone could have frozen sunlight. You're deflecting. I'm observing. Matthias's eyes, pale and calculating, fixed on Marina, a maid who touches relics and levs, who manifests seraph-born powers, who arrives at Dravengard precisely when rogues begin appearing. He smiled without warmth. Some might call that convenient. Marina felt the weight of every gaze in the room. She started to respond, but Kale raised his hand. Lady Marina is under my protection. Her lineage has been verified. Her loyalty is beyond question. Each word was pronounced with absolute authority. Unlike others in this room, Matthias's expression flickered. Just for a moment, but Kale caught it. You're afraid, Kale said softly, rising from his chair. Not of rogues. Of her. Why would you fear a seraph-born, Matthias, unless you had reason to want them extinct? This is absurd. You were Erasmus Thorne's apprentice, Kale continued, pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. Before he became my advisor, you studied forbidden magic together. Blood manipulation. Memory theft. He moved around the table with predatory grace. When Erasmus disappeared, I assumed he acted alone. I was wrong. Matthias stood abruptly. You have no proof. Don't I? Kale gestured to Ronan, who placed a bundle of letters on the table, old parchment, carefully preserved. Found in the archives sealed with your personal ward. Correspondence with Erasmus dating back 400 years. Plans to eliminate the Seraphborn. To steal the relics they protected. To remove my memory of the vow so I wouldn't interfere. The room erupted in whispers. Matthias's composure cracked. They were too powerful. The Seraphborn alliance threatened everything we built. Humans who could command vampire magic? Who could heal what we corrupted? They would have made us obsolete. So you orchestrated genocide, Marina said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos. My people. My village. All of it, to protect your pride. Matthias's eyes locked on her with pure hatred. You should have stayed extinct. He moved faster than thought, his hand erupting with black tendrils of blood magic, the same forbidden technique that had stolen Kale's memories. The attack lanced toward Marina's heart.
Kale was faster.
He intercepted the magic with his own body, the dark energy slamming into his chest instead. He staggered, veins of black corruption spreading across his skin, but his hand closed around Matthias's throat with crushing force. You dare, Kale snarled, his eyes bleeding to pure crimson. Attack what is mine to protect. Marina grabbed the Heart of Dusk from her satchel, its light blazing. She pressed it against Kale's back, channeling purifying magic through him. The corruption began to burn away, smoking and hissing as Seraph-born power met forbidden blood magic. Matthias used the distraction to tear free, stumbling backward. You've already lost, Kale. The army I've been building for a century is moving on Dravengard as we speak. 50 rogues. 100. Enough to tear your precious castle apart stone by stone. He fled before anyone could stop him, dissolving into shadow. Kale collapsed against the table, Marina's arms the only thing keeping him upright. The purification had worked, but the cost was evident in his haggard expression. "I'm fine," he rasped, though they both knew it was a lie. "You're an idiot," Marina countered, her voice shaking. "You could have died. Better me than you." Kale's hand found hers, gripping it like an anchor. "The vow, Marina. I won't fail again." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Gratitude, terror, and an emotion neither was ready to speak aloud. "My lord," Silas interrupted gently. "What are your orders?" Kale straightened with visible effort, his king's mask sliding back into place despite the cracks Marina could now see in it. "Matthias is right about one thing. An army is coming." He looked at Marina, then at his council. "Lady Marina Vale is hereby named Keeper of the Relics, with all rights and protections that position entails. She is Seraph-born, heir to Lion's bloodline, and under my personal guard." The council exploded in protest. "A mortal cannot hold sacred office. This violates every tradition. She's been here a week." "Enough." Kale's voice resonated with centuries of command. "The Seraph-born were our allies for 3 millennia before they were betrayed. I'm correcting that betrayal. Anyone who disagrees can leave my service." Silence fell, hostile and crackling with tension. Marina stood, her legs still unsteady. "I accept the responsibility, and I swear I'll use everything I am to protect this kingdom, even from those within it who would rather see it fall than change." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Before anyone could respond, horns blared across Dravengard. Not the controlled warning from before, but chaos, multiple horns, urgent and desperate. Ronan's face went grim. "They're here." Through the chamber's window, they could see torches in the distance.
Hundreds of them.
Moving through the forest toward the castle, like a tide of fire and death. Kale moved to the window, Marina beside him. His hand found hers again, and this time he didn't let go. "This is what Matthias wanted," he said quietly. "To force me to choose between defending my kingdom and protecting you." Marina squeezed his hand. "Then we don't give him the satisfaction of that choice. We fight together." Kale looked down at her, this impossible woman who had walked into his life and shattered every certainty he'd built over 8 centuries. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, gentle despite the violence approaching. "Together," he agreed, the word a vow more binding than any magic. The horn screamed again, closer now. The battle for Dravengard Castle was beginning. The outer walls fell within the hour. Not from structural failure, but from sheer overwhelming force. Wave after wave of corrupted vampires threw themselves against Dravengard's defenses, their movements coordinated with unnatural precision. These weren't mindless monsters. Matthias had crafted them with purpose, with strategy, with 4 centuries of planning behind every strike. Kale fought at the front line, a whirlwind of dusk steel and ancient fury. His sword carved through corrupted flesh with surgical precision, each movement honed by 800 years of warfare. Ronan, Silas, and Dorian formed a triangle around him, their coordination flawless even as blood, both black and red, painted the courtyard stones. But they were outnumbered 5-1. "Fall back to the inner keep," Kale commanded, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Regroup at." Pain exploded through his chest. Kale looked down to see black tendrils wrapped around his torso, pulsing with forbidden magic. Matthias emerged from the shadows behind him, his hands wreathed in the same dark energy that had stolen Kale's memories centuries ago. "You should have let the Seraph-born die," Matthias hissed. "Should have let the past stay buried." The corruption spread through Kale's veins like poison, dropping him to his knees. His sword clattered to the ground. Through dimming vision, he saw his guards fighting desperately to reach him, but the rogues formed an impenetrable wall between them. "This is how it ends," Kale thought distantly. "After everything, undone by the same magic that stole my memories. Then light erupted across the battlefield. Silver, pure, and absolutely devastating. Marina stood at the keep's entrance, the heart of dusk blazing in her raised hands like a captive star. But this wasn't the defensive barrier from the outpost. This was something far more powerful, more ancient, more terrifying in its raw magnitude. Enough! Her voice resonated with power that didn't belong to any mortal throat. The light expanded outward in a wave, and where it touched the corrupted vampires, they began to change. The black veins receded. The void eyes cleared. The twisted magic that bound them to Matthias's will burned away like morning mist. Marina walked forward, each step deliberate despite the immense strain evident in her trembling frame. The heart of dusk pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, and Kale realized with awe that she wasn't just channeling its power. She'd merged with it completely, her seraph-born blood and the relic's magic becoming one. Marina, stop. Kale gasped, fighting against the corruption still wrapped around his chest. It's too much, you'll kill yourself. She reached him, never breaking stride. Her hand touched his face, and where her skin met his, the dark tendrils burned away. Kale felt the forbidden magic retreating, purified by the sheer force of her presence. I won't lose you, Marina said, her voice her own again but underscored with ancient determination. Not to him. Not to anyone. Matthias snarled, gathering more blood magic for a killing strike. Insolent child. 3 crossbow bolts struck him simultaneously. Ronan, Silas, and Dorian had fought through the thinning rogues, their weapons trained on the traitor with lethal precision. Matthias staggered, black blood seeping from the wounds, but he wasn't finished. If I die, he spat, this castle dies with me. I've woven my magic into its foundations for centuries. When my heart stops, Dravengard crumbles. Marina raised the heart of dusk higher. Then I'll hold it together. She released the relic's full power. Light consumed everything, the courtyard, the walls, the sky itself. Kale felt Marina's magic weaving through every stone of Dravengard, replacing Matthias's corruption with something clean and strong and alive. The purified vampires collapsed, freed from their enslavement. The remaining rogues disintegrated, and Matthias, the architect of 4 centuries of suffering, burned to ash with a scream that echoed across the mountains. Then Marina fell. Kale caught her before she hit the ground, the heart of dusk tumbling from her limp fingers. Her skin was paper white, her breathing shallow, her heartbeats so faint he had to strain his supernatural hearing to detect it. No, he breathed, gathering her against his chest. No, Marina, stay with me. Stay with me. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused. Did we win?
Yes.
Yes, we won. Because of you. Kale's voice cracked. Now stay awake. That's an order. Can't order me around, she mumbled, a ghost of her usual defiance. Not your possession. Marina. Her eyes closed. Kale's roar of anguish shook the castle walls. He lifted her in his arms and ran, faster than any mortal eye could track, through corridors and up staircases to his own private chambers. He laid her on his bed, the first living person to touch it in 2 centuries, and refused to leave her side even as healers swarmed the room. The seraph-born magic burned through her mortal body, the head healer explained grimly. She channeled power meant for immortals. Her heart is failing. Then give her my blood, Kale commanded. Turn her. Make her immortal. My lord, without consent. Save her. The words were both command and plea. I don't care what it costs. Save her. The healers worked through the night while Kale sat vigil, holding Marina's hand with a gentleness that contradicted every legend about vampire kings. He whispered to her unconscious form, apologies, confessions, promises he didn't know how to keep. You were right, he said quietly. About the walls I built. About loneliness. About everything. His thumb traced circles on her palm. You walked into my castle and reminded me what it felt like to be alive. If you leave now, if you die saving me. His voice broke. I don't know how to survive that. I don't want to learn. Dawn approached. The healers finally stepped back, their work done. Marina's heartbeat was stronger, her breathing steady. She would live, but whether she would wake unchanged or wake as something new remained uncertain. Kale refused to move. He sat beside her bed as sunlight began filtering through the enchanted windows, his hand still holding hers, watching her face for any sign of consciousness. When her eyes finally opened, gray and clear and blessedly alive, the first thing she saw was Kale's face, and the first thing she registered was the expression there.
Fear.
Raw, undisguised fear. The vampire king who had faced down armies, survived betrayals, and ruled for 8 centuries without flinching, was terrified of losing her. Kale. Her voice was barely a whisper. His grip on her hand tightened. You're awake. Thank the darkness. You're awake. Marina tried to sit up, wincing at the weakness in her limbs. The battle.
Won.
Because of you. Kale helped her into a sitting position with infinite care. You purified Matthias's corruption. Saved the castle. Saved everyone. His amber eyes searched her face desperately. And nearly died doing it. But I didn't, Marina pointed out. I'm still here. Barely. The word came out harsh with suppressed emotion. Your heart stopped twice. The healers said. He stopped, unable to continue. Marina reached up with her free hand and touched his face, mirroring the gesture he'd made on the tower days ago. I'm still here, she repeated firmly. And I'm not going anywhere. Kale leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. When he opened them again, they held something Marina had never seen there before. Absolute, terrifying vulnerability. I can't lose you, he whispered. I know I have no right to ask, no claim to make, but Marina, I can't. And in that moment, sitting in the Vampire King's chambers with dawn light streaming through windows and their hands still intertwined, Marina understood what neither of them had been brave enough to say. This wasn't just about ancient vows or seraph-born magic. This was something infinitely more dangerous. This was love beginning to take root in hearts that had both forgotten how to let anyone in. 3 days after the battle, when Marina could finally walk without assistance, Kale came to her chambers at midnight. Come with me, he said quietly, offering his hand. There's something I want to show you. She took his hand without hesitation, letting him guide her through corridors she'd never explored, down staircases that spiraled into the castle's heart. They emerged into a garden she hadn't known existed, a hidden sanctuary where moonflowers bloomed in silver profusion and ancient trees wept crystalline tears that chimed softly in the night breeze. I haven't brought anyone here in 4 centuries, Kale admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. This was Lionna's favorite place. After she died, after Erasmus stole my memories, I kept coming here without understanding why. My body remembered what my mind had forgotten. Marina looked around at the ethereal beauty surrounding them, at magic kept alive through centuries of unconscious devotion. It's breathtaking. It was the only place I could still feel anything at all. Kale turned to face her fully, moonlight casting silver across his features. Until you walked into my throne room and reminded me what it meant to be awake. Marina's breath caught at the raw honesty in his expression. I never expected this, Kale continued, moving closer. Never expected someone to see past the monster I'd become. To touch my relics and heal them. To stand beside me in battle. To make me want things I'd buried so deep I thought they were dead. His hand came up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. You terrify me, Marina Vale. Because loving you means I can lose you. Loving me? Marina's voice trembled. Yes. The word was simple, absolute. I love you. I, who swore never to trust again, who built walls so high nothing could scale them, I love you with a desperation that defies 8 centuries of careful control. Marina's eyes glistened. I was so afraid, she whispered. Afraid of you, of what I felt, of a destiny I didn't understand. I came here planning to hate you, to blame you for everything I'd lost. She pressed her hand over his, holding it against her cheek. But you're not the monster they said you were. You're just someone who forgot how to be human, and I'm not afraid anymore. Their foreheads touched, breaths mingling in the moonlit air. Between them, the heart of dusk, which Marina had brought instinctively, began to glow with warm, steady light. Not the blazing power of battle, but something gentler. Recognition, approval, completion. Every immortal law says I shouldn't choose you, Kale murmured against her lips. That a king cannot bind himself to a mortal, cannot make himself vulnerable, cannot. Then don't choose me as a king. Marina's fingers threaded through his silver hair. Choose me as Kale. Just Kale. Something in his chest, dead for 8 centuries, stirred to painful, overwhelming life. Then I choose you, Marina Vale. His voice broke on her name. Not as my servant, not as my keeper, but as my equal. My partner. The one who woke me when I'd forgotten I was sleeping. I choose you too, she breathed. Not the vampire king, but the man who remembered how to hope. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of moonlight and possibility, of ancient vows fulfilled and new promises beginning. The garden bloomed brighter around them, as if the magic itself celebrated this impossible union. Mortal and immortal, seraph-born and vampire. 2 broken souls choosing wholeness together. When they finally pulled apart, Kale rested his forehead against hers, his amber eyes bright with emotions he'd forgotten how to name. The future will be difficult, he warned. There will be those who oppose this, who see our bond as weakness. Then we'll face them together, Marina said firmly. Like we face Matthias. Like we'll face everything that comes. Together, Kale echoed, the word of vow more binding than any magic. He pulled her close, wrapping her in his arms as moonflowers drifted down like snow around them. For the first time in 4 centuries, the vampire king felt peace, not the cold emptiness he'd mistaken for contentment, but genuine, warm, terrifying peace. And for the first time in 800 years of existence, Kale Draven did not fear waking up, because someone would finally be waking beside him.